All right. So I got a question for you. What is empathy, and why can't I see my chat? There we are. Okay. So what is empathy? Okay. Putting yourself in someone else's shoes, being fully present, listening, focusing on the other person and being there, deep understanding, presence, understanding, walking alongside somebody, being able to identify other people's feelings and needs, listening with the heart, just being present without mental commentary, a soft pillow, active listening, understanding people's pain, being curious, being empty and open-hearted, expressing care for others. By the way, if I'm not reading yours, it's because it just whizzed by so quickly. And hopefully you're taking a peek at these yourself. So accompanying, oh, I like that. Giving space for feelings and needs. Being there 100%, listening to the speaker's humanity. Okay, I think we'll tail that off now. Thank you, everybody, for contributing to that. And I gotta say, I kind of agree with all of it. However, I do think it's important to bring in a focus that we saw in some of these responses, but not all of them. Sometimes it was just implied. So how do we understand? How do we be present? How, what's the how here? Because we could say, yeah, just go be present. But present to what? Present to their words, present to their story, present to their being, present to their thoughts. And here I want to be real clear. Our goal is to be present to somebody's feelings and needs, which is incredibly focused, if you think about it, that we're really not necessarily paying attention to their words. And I know that might sound strange. However, what we're trying to do is really get into the life energy, right? I love to use that word, the life energy of what that person's going through. What is their life energy telling them? What are they experiencing? Specifically, when it comes to needs. Why is that? Because what do we call somebody without needs? Dead, right? So what does that make needs? Life. So what are we doing? We're checking in on that life level. And I remember the first time I did it, it blew my mind. And it can also be scary. There's a lot to this thing of feelings and needs. And so I really want to keep that in focus here. And that's so much. If I had a nickel for every time I said feelings and needs, or if I was at a party and we were playing a drinking game and I had to drink every time I said feelings and needs, I'd never make it out of the party. So it's just about really, it's the difficulty can be to get rid of all the other stuff and bring that focus right in to somebody's life energy. And I also think about it as, what are they experiencing? Not necessarily what they're thinking, but what are they experiencing? And so I find that best captured in feelings and needs. And that's why we say it over and over and over again. And I know one of the issues that many of us have is that when we say feelings and needs words in the beginning, they don't exactly resonate with us. And that's because, at least in my humble opinion, we have never had a relationship with them. We've never really brought them into our focus and thought of them as incredibly useful and meaningful things to pay attention to. And so doing that can feel weird, right? Fear of the unknown. And so again, that's why Doreen and Kathann, by the way, they spotted this and said, let's get over that. Like, and so if you are anxious, if it does seem weird to you, let's just stay with it until it's not weird. And, you know, I talk about, you know, this phrase, are you feeling blank because you're needing blank, right? And that sounds so robotic, unless you mean it, right? And in order for us to mean it, we have to really be able to embody it, to really understand it. And then suddenly these things that sounded like robotic words can have incredibly profound effects on our existence. I can tell you, Antonio, for example, who's been practicing empathy for 10 years, maybe, still says, are you feeling because you're needing? And he wants his guesses to be, are you feeling because you're needing? Why? Because that's kind of where we're headed. That's the focus that we're trying to bring. And look, we have the internet. We have plenty to distract us from all sorts, right? And plenty of stories and all sorts of, you know, we have 1 million times as much information floating across the surface of the earth that we did 100 years ago. So suddenly it becomes important for us to narrow our focus and not expand it. And I think this is one of those examples. So why do we do this? Why do we practice empathy? What does it do for us? And I guess another question is, when do we need empathy? How do we use this in life? How do we make it fit into life? So when do we prescribe empathy? When do we know we need it? So I'm actually going to open the chat for this one. Right, if we can do that. So my first question is, what does empathy do for us? What is it for? Fosters connection, connect to others, connects us, balance, helps us connect more deeply to our own feelings and needs. It helps us understand one another on a deeper level. And it helps us process something that's there anyway, our feelings and our needs, right? Our needs, you got them right now. They're there. And I do think it really helps bring us closer to ourselves. And when I say that, it means, to me, it's a big piece of self-expression. Because if I don't know who I am, how can I express myself? And so empathy and self-empathy are really the ways I find out who I am. And well, I don't mean just how I am in the big picture, how I am in the moment. Now, just an example, you know, we're not the same person all the time, much like Alice in Wonderland. You know, I'm one person one moment and another person the next moment. You know, like, for example, I know people have asked me, Tom, are you the kind of person that can handle criticism? And my answer is, when? And that's what I want to remember. They're going to be, if I'm having a great day, bring it on. If I'm hurting, if I'm tired, if things aren't going the way I was hoping they would go, maybe not. And so I love the fact that empathy and self-empathy helps me realize who I am, and therefore helps me express who I am and figure out how I can take care of myself. there's another piece to this that's super important, and that is, we've talked about this a little bit, the idea of our habitual mind or our robot mind, right? And our being mind. And for me, empathy helps me connect to my being. And so it gives me like a beacon, it gives me a compass, it gives me a way to move to that place when I want to be there, And I don't always want to be there, but when I do want to be there, it helps me go there. And when do I want to be there? When do I want to be there? And this is where I'm going to ask you the other question is, when do I know I need empathy? How do we know that we need empathy? And it's true, we probably all could use empathy at any given moment on any day. However, there are some times that it's really more important, at least for me, to get empathy, to have an empathic view. And I can feel when I'm starting to kind of get into my habitual mind, which doesn't necessarily bring me where I want to be, doesn't bring me to myself. It brings me to something I was taught years ago and that I've been habituated to do. So when I'm struggling, when I'm triggered, when I'm experiencing frustration, when I'm lonely or disconnected, when I'm suffering. For me also, when I need to make an important decision or I'm really confused, I don't know what to do. Confused, overwhelmed, scared. And there's a word right there, when I'm judging. To me, the most important thing empathy does for me is it helps me move from my robot self, my habitual mind, to my connected, my being self. And so if I'm thinking somebody's a jerk, I know I need empathy. Now, I might want to think they're a jerk for a little while until I'm tired of it, because it doesn't really feel good for me to think somebody's a jerk. So what I can do is, when I'm tired of thinking somebody's a jerk, I can say, wait a minute, I want to have a different experience. I want to be more connected. I don't like thinking that somebody's a jerk. And so this is where empathy really makes such a huge difference. It brings me back to myself and allows me to take a judgmental view and shift it into a compassionate view. I call that compassionate understanding, right? When we can see somebody's doing something and thinking, instead of thinking they're a jerk, we might think they're in pain. And given the choice to live in a world full of jerks versus a world full of people who are struggling and in pain, often like I am, I'll take the latter every day when I can. And this is part of the skill set that we're working on here. It's not just about the mechanics of empathy, it's the application of it as well. It's the navigation, using it as a means of really affecting how our life works. So yeah, let me just check my notes here. So here's another question, like, where do you get empathy? How does that even work? Where is it? So I'm aware of at least two ways. One is what we call self-empathy, and the other is empathy for others. Now, you might notice in the course, and actually in my workshops, I will teach empathy before I teach self-empathy. And the reason is, when we're giving empathy, we are not that other person. And so we don't have their habitual mind. We have our own habitual mind, but we don't have their habitual mind. And so it is easier in the beginning to give somebody else empathy than it is to give yourself empathy. because we bring along all the stories, all the, all the whole lifetime of habitual thinking, and it just becomes more difficult when that's at play. And so the way the course runs is where we work, and the way life runs too. I mean, there are times when I can give myself empathy and I'm fine. Often when I have an internal conflict, it's wonderful. And sometimes I benefit from having my empathy buddies or my empathy medics, these people in my life who can see the back of my head, so to speak, right? It's like they're not me. And so they can see something that I can't see. And I love that kind of diversity of perspective that we get from empathy, and empathy circles even more so. And so we really start to conjure empathy that way. And then I found, for me anyway, the more I give empathy, the more to others, the more I build my empathy muscle. And then I can start to figure out a way to look at myself as almost like from that third side, and really have some compassion for myself. And it also really, yeah, it just helps me be who I want to be. I was in I had a really hard time sleeping last weekend because I was in the middle of a real estate transaction and my attorney disappeared. And so I just couldn't sleep. I was a wreck. I was so ticked off. And I was like, so I was going to call up my attorney and read him the riot act and say, come on, man, you got to support me. And instead, because I could self-empathize, when I got on the phone, I was like, John, I'm hurting, man. I could barely sleep this weekend. I'm really stressed out and I need to know, I really want to know what's going on. And I really could use your help here, man. Well, you could imagine the difference between that and, hey, what is up with you, man? Right? You know what I mean? And so I had the ability to do that. And why? Because of empathy and because of self-empathy. So it really does play a super important role in life. So to get into it, right? So where do we find it? Where do we go? So yes, self-empathy and empathy. One of the problems that we kind of ran into, or challenges that we ran into, is that the society that most of us live in, it's not really built that way. It's not really built with empathy as part of the practice of being a human in a lot of societies, because we have structures that really just don't help that happen that much. We have therapists, and that's it often can result in an empathic interaction, but not always. And so, how do you do it? Well, that's, again, I'm going to just go to Kathy and Doreen and our community in general, by the way, in the whole world. And that is that we have each other. And so to help that happen, we have empathy circles we're going to be introducing. We have empathy cafes. And so the whole idea is, and we were thinking about this, empathy, like really doing empathy is like jumping in a pool. It's such an intense experience. And so we really wanted to make it so that that fear of this new thing that isn't part of our culture is doable. And how can we do that? How do we bring us in? So the thinking was, we want to set it up so that you could stand around the pool. You could even watch what people do in the pool until you say, you know what? Okay, I'm ready to get in the pool, but not a minute before. And so that is actually what we've created, right? If you want to stand around the edge of the pool, come to an empathy cafe and you will see the pool. And if you want to jump in, you can, but not a minute before you want to. And so the idea is to bridge this discomfort, this habitual social kind of framework that we have from what's out there to something new. And so that's what we're offering to really make this work. And everything in the course, and why are we even having this special workshop? Everything. Did I mention the word everything? Everything we do from here on out is going to depend on an empathic view, the skill of empathy. So please, let's pay close attention so that the rest of the course becomes meaningful. Like I said, it's a lot like an engine. And so if you don't have an engine in your car, you're not going anywhere. And so that's why we're here today. And that's why we've created this really comprehensive view and entree into this practice. And I do think one of the greatest gifts for me was once through this practice of empathy, I really developed a practice of self-empathy. And self-empathy, as it turns out, allows me to be my own best friend, which is awesome because I'm always here. So it's great that I'm my own best friend and that I actually have a way to do it. And I can give myself empathy, and I can move myself intentionally from my habitual mind to my more connected space. So this is all part of why we do this. I guess let's see. There is something I want to mention here. And there's a phrase I learned from my teacher, Marshall Rosenberg, which is that you can't give empathy when you need empathy. So there's a certain hygiene or an ecology, if you will, to this work. It's not just straight, oh, I'm going to do empathy, boom, right? It's that when. And so a part of this is to just realize that if I need empathy, I'm not going to be able to give empathy very well. And Marshall coined a term to describe this, and he called it empathy from hell, because it's just so difficult when we're hurting, when we have something to say in here and it's not coming out, and yet we're trying to listen to what's alive for somebody else. And so I really want to pay attention to that ecology. And I think I just talked about this, I think it was in the OF meeting. I remember being in a bit of a spat with my, at the time, partner. And she said, Tom, you don't care about my needs. And my response was, you're right. I don't, but I want to. And that was, to me, that was the thing, right? It's like, I'm not there now. I want to be there, but I'm not going to fake it either. So if I don't care about your needs, or if you don't care about somebody else's needs, you might want to get some empathy, right? Until that organically happens. And it's just like when you, like I said, there are a lot of things that we're all going to notice organically happen. It's as if we're designed for this, right? Which is the more we can mourn, the more we can celebrate. The more we can celebrate, the more we can mourn. The more we get empathy, the more we give empathy, which is another reason self-empathy is so important, because I could actually get it from me. And so that allows me to go to somebody who's in a lot of pain and might be saying things that are hard for me to hear. And I can still do it because I can maintain my compassionate understanding through self-empathy. Not always, but a lot of the time. And when I can't, I know that a way to get out of these conversations, and that's something that we practice. It's like, when I'm just noticing I'm triggered, and I'm going to need to give myself some empathy so that I can respond to you. Just to go back to like the I don't care about your needs thing, right? It's like, no, I want to. And so I know what to do in order for me to really genuinely care about your needs. And that is to give myself empathy or get it from one of my empathy buddies or one of my empathy medics. And so this is kind of like the ecology, or I call it spiritual hygiene of empathy itself. I'm just going to check here. Yeah. So I'm going to stop there for a second and see if anybody has any questions about anything I've said so far. Something doesn't make sense or something needs a little clarification or alignment. Take a minute to think about it. Raise your cartoon hand if you have a question. Kathan.
Thanks. So every year when I listen to you speak about empathy, I write down all these things, and I notice that it's slightly different every year. And so I would love to hear from you. If you wanted to give a definition of empathy, you looked at the list and said, yeah, it's all those things. But if you were going to give a definition of empathy, I'm curious this year what that would sound like.
All right. Right. So if I only had one breath to tell you in, right?
I know.
Okay, here it comes.
Okay.
It's the exploration and understanding of my own and others' feelings and needs. Right? It's the exploration and the connection to, right? Understanding, connection to. I think that covers it. Okay. I'm getting a lot of thumbs up here, so I must have done a good job there. Okay. All right, Gail. Hey.
Hi. I heard you say, and I believe this is essential, you have to be embodied and able to give empathy. So how does one tell they're embodied?
Well, one thing is I just notice my willingness, right? In other words, that's something that happens right in the moment. It's like I'm either going to go or I'm going to stop. And how do I figure that out? It's basically my gut is telling me that I'm genuinely willing to. And just to, sometimes we could talk ourselves into the fact that we think we're ready. Although really you only have to do that a couple of times before you realize that doesn't work, right? So the idea would be, am I empathized, really is what the way I would say it, right? And that is, I feel my body, I notice where my thoughts want to go. And so I can recognize, and we can all learn to recognize when we're genuinely curious versus we better do this because we're supposed to, right? Does that help? Yeah.
Yes, I also think that's why you do a check-in. So we start learning to tune into ourselves, where we are and how we are arriving.
Totally. Yeah. We don't do any meetings here at all. All of our staff meetings, we always start with a check-in, always, because it's like you said, that just brings us here, whoever we are in that moment. And often we might not even notice who we are in a moment. And so I love check-ins. They are, again, I think of them as hygiene. So yeah, thanks for that, Gail. All right, Jeannie, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I've heard you use the term empathy medic a couple of times, and
Yes.
I imagine I know what that is, but could you tell us more? Is this the right time to tell us more?
Sure. Well, that's part of the who and the where, right? Which is, I encourage you to have an empathy buddy, right? And when I say that, this is somebody who their sole purpose in your life is, they're not your friend, they're your empathy buddy. Now, you will probably, if you keep an empathy buddyship going on long enough, you'll love each other, okay? However, that's the purpose of the exchange is very specific, right? It's to get empathy and give empathy in a very metered fashion. Now, the thing about having an empathy buddy is that they may not always be available when you need empathy. Maybe they're on vacation, maybe they're doing a workshop, maybe they're just simply not available. And so that leaves me to either self-empathize, which, by the way I like to do it is in writing so that I can reflect on my very own thoughts. However, there's another way, and that is to have people in your lives that we have in your life, right, that you have an agreement with, that look, when I'm really in trouble, can I give you a call for emergency empathy? And so I call them, emergency being the key word there, right? That's where the medic part comes from. It's like that way we have greater possibility to take care of ourselves when it comes to this thing about needing empathy. And well, I'm lucky, right? Because I have like 5 empathy medics, but just 2 empathy medics, you know, somebody from maybe your practice group or just somebody you've met through the forum, somebody who you kind of think, yeah, okay, I think if I called them that I would actually get empathy, that would, and that is one of the qualifications, right? That an empathy medic is somebody who we're comfortable with, can in fact give us empathy when we need it. And again, if they can't, we will only make that call a couple of times as well. And I know I've had somebody who I thought was my empathy medic, but the first thing they wanted to do is fix me. So that's something that becomes part of kind of our little ecology that we create around us, right? Our little community that understands and participates in what we do. So does that help? Does that do it? Okay, if you're looking for the mute button.
There we go. I'm
Okay.
finally allowed.
Okay.
Yes, very helpful answer and thorough. And you even anticipated my follow-up questions. Thanks, Tom.
Oh, okay. Thanks. All right, Celestina.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. I love what you said about, moving from habitual self to a more connected space, So for me, it's being intentional about making that connection. So but I would like you to throw more light on the spiritual hygiene. You said something about spiritual hygiene. So could you do more explanation on that? How it's connected with the empathy? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it brings me to life, right? It brings me to a connection to life. So it's when I'm not connected to life that I could use something else, right? A different perspective. And so I just like to call that hygiene, where I want to move from a place of judgment that doesn't feel good. It ultimately disconnects me from myself. It disconnects me from others, to move to a more connected place. And so that's what I mean when I say spiritual hygiene. It's to recognize my need, right? My need for empathy. So I can navigate that way and realize when I need it and I don't have it, or when I need it and I have it, and when I can give it to myself and when I can't quite. So we always, for me, I want to have many ways in my life to get to that centered place, that to find me in that, to find my life experience in that. And so that's what I mean when I say that. Does that help? Is that good? Yes? All right. Betsy?
Great. Thank you, Tom. Everybody on the line. What a timely meeting this is. My empathy buddy and I tend to notice that we're learning not to fix each other, not to educate, but we tend to go into analyzing, and it's just, I know it's because I'm not present with them. There's some fear, or maybe is that a need for my empathy when I'm trying to give empathy? I'm sorry, I can't give you more specifics, but
Well,
I
look,
tend to wind up in analyzing.
sure. Well, first of all, I'm going to guess the reason you're analyzing is because you actually care about this person. And maybe you're really good at it. A lot of us are. We are really good at analyzing. We're humans, for Pete's sake. I mean, we're probably the best. So we're going to use what we have, right? If you don't, and that's kind of the tricky part, right? Because we are all practiced, and that's the exercise we're going to actually do today. We're going to work on realizing that part of us, and I don't want to make it like that it's wrong to not give empathy. Really, either we can or we can't in any given moment, and I really want to pay attention to that as well. And it is interesting when I find myself slipping into non-empathic responses, it's probably because I need empathy. And it could be, I just care so much about you. I'm stimulated to hear it, and I want to fix your problem. I want to help. And here's the surprise ending. Often when I get enough empathy, in fact, we all will experience this when we've kind of gotten to that place where we're pretty clear on who we are in that moment, we are all going to start to brainstorm. Have you noticed that happen? Like when you get to that place, all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, I can do something about this, right? And it's when we start talking about what we want versus what we don't want and really get that vision. And then empathy is awesome for that, right? And so when we get that, we will naturally, organically enter a brainstorming state where we can suddenly think of many ways. And that's how I know I'm in needs awareness or in needs consciousness, because right, in needs consciousness, how many ways are there to meet your needs? Anybody have that number?
And
10,000, there it is. So, right? So the thing is, right? So when I can really sort out what the need is, again, there's an explosion of opportunity, right? And so again, that's the goal, is not to never have strategies. It's to have strategies that are born of an awareness of needs. That's the difference. Life is a strategy. When you open your eyes in the morning, we're already in your life is a series of strategies. So it's not like we're making strategy bad, right? And empathy good. It ultimately is that it's that combination of the two, that union of, again, a strategy born of an awareness of needs. And so the good news is, for me, those have been my best strategies because they're directly related to the awareness of the need. And so it's most likely that the medicine that we think of is going to work. And I have noticed in my life that things tend to go much better for me when I'm coming from me, when I'm coming from my state, and when I can learn to do that. So I hope that covers you, Betsy.
thank you so much, Tom.
Cool. All right, Gordon, you need to unmute yourself, and then we'll go.
I'd like you to kindly elaborate some more about this situation where the person you're with needs empathy and you need empathy yourself.
Yes.
I think the example recently was with somebody in a car, and we were in a long drive and there was no place to run, to take a time out to go.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Gordon. Thank you for asking this. So I have two options here for us. One is learn to be quiet. Just to learn to say, you know what? If one of us isn't jumping out of this car, maybe we should let's just hold this and maybe just take care of ourselves. So that's one thing. And not, and again, I've learned to do that in a relatively compassionate way, right? Say, I would love I would love to give you empathy, but I'm noticing it's just, I got my own stuff going on. And so it's really going to be hard for me. So I'm going to give you a sneak peek into the distant future. And that is that at some point, if you and the other person have empathy skills, we can do a process. And please don't expect yourself to do this now. But one day we will be able to do what I call empathy alchemy. And that is that, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to give you a teeny little bit of empathy. I'm just going to give you my best, my little empathy guess. And now I'm going to ask you to give me a little teeny bit of empathy. And what are we doing? And we're creating something from nothing, hence alchemy, right? And so we can build and create more and more of an empathic view of one another by doing this kind of infinity shaped thing that we see a lot around this community. So, but again, that's something it really is pretty high level stuff, but it is in everybody's future if we stay with the work. Hope that helps for you. I can't hear you, but you look pretty happy.
Okay. I guess that's what counts, right? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So what I heard you saying is that in that kind of situation where you're locked in and there's no place to run, is this, look, we're just floundering right now. Let's just take some time out for ourselves to get ourselves calm and grounded and revisit able to.
Yeah. Well, because what are the options? I've been through this. Actually, I remember I was with my son once, and I was so angry, and we were both so stimulated. Because I almost missed one of my own workshops, which I've never done. And he was having his own crisis, which is why I almost missed my workshop, because he kept my car. And I remember when we finally were able to kind of get back together, I was so impressed with both of us, frankly. We didn't say a word. We just knew this wasn't the time, because anything that came out was going to be harmful. So it is, you need to unmute yourself, Gordon, if you're going to talk.
Is it true that once you're triggered, it takes like a couple of hours for your amygdala to quiet down, your nervous system to return to baseline?
Yeah, I mean, the information that I have is 1 second of trigger gives you a 20-minute supply of what I call stupid juice, which is, going to lower literally lower my IQ. And so I know if I'm triggered, and I think there was a story with my son. And did we get to that week yet? That was that way. So if you're upset for 20 minutes, it goes to 40. If you're upset for 60, it goes to 120 minutes. So it's like, it's literally a chemical process. And I've learned to notice when it's happening. That's a really great thing about this. We talk about feelings. Well, I know for me, feelings didn't have a lot of use in life, but now they really do, because they tell me about my needs. And they also tell me if this is a good time to talk or not, right? Is this a good time to open my mouth the way I'm feeling? No, it's not. But if I never paid attention to my feelings, which for a lot of my life I didn't, because I thought they were useless, I didn't have that. I couldn't even make that decision, right? Because I didn't have that information. So like that.
Great, thank you. Keep your eyes open, your heart open, your mouth shut.
There you go. Thanks. All right. Thanks. Alice.
Thank you. I just want to mention when I got coverage, which I did not know, the program really helped me to feel my feelings. So I was feeling terrible. I was having horrible pain in my head, around my body. I had no idea what was going on. I had nausea. COVID was not going around. I didn't think I've seen anybody. And I'm like, okay, I need to go to ER, and I go look at my husband and goes, well, I'll take you with our special needs daughter. I'm like, that's not gonna work. I called some others, they're not available. So I give myself permission really quickly to call ER. Yeah, I mean to call 911. And it was amazing because I don't think if I was a program, I would probably try to get through it a little longer. So I'll be fine. I'll be fine. So they give me permission to feel myself. At emergency room, I had a great care. I was able to feel my feelings, share and answer questions, give them permission to get scanned, and they found that I had some thyroid nodule on. I'm still waiting for a biopsy, but and I was not stressing. I mean, this is unbelievable. Like I said, I've been in program 3 years, but not really working. I just want to share that because you called about medics. I
Thanks.
mean, these were real, true medics that gave me
Yeah,
so much
yeah,
love.
yeah, yeah. I mean, look, pain is pain, whether it's because you're leaning on a hot pipe or it's because somebody died in your life. I mean, pain is pain. And the ability to feel feelings gives us the ability to feel that pain. And that gives us the ability to do something about it, which you just demonstrated. So thank you, Alice. All right. Itaya, did I say that correctly?
It's Itai. Yeah,
Itaya.
thank you.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's okay. I'm asking for Sue. She asked, what is the difference between circle empathy and cafe empathy? Empathy cafe and empathy circle.
Okay, I'm just going to give you a quick answer because I think we're going to talk about it in a little while. But the quick answer is a circle is when you're up and running and you're just looking for the opportunity to go into an organized space, whereas the cafes have those are the ones where there's an educational aspect to it, and it's designed for, as I said earlier, for kind of standing around the pool as a way of moving into an empathy practice. So the cafe is moving into an empathy practice, and the circle is when you got one, and you're looking for a place to express it. Clifford.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't have a question so much as I just wanted to express, as someone with some very, very deep developmental trauma, where early in my life, infancy all the way through teen years and leaving the home, developmental needs weren't met, and how much of a challenge. I'm loving everything that's being offered here. It's connecting. I just wanted to comment and say it can be extra hard to recognize in the moment things like you're suggesting, like that, you need empathy, or that interoception and stuff. So I just wanted to just toss that out there, that for me, it's like, man, I just love and connect to everything we're talking about. And that also it can be especially difficult with, which many of us have some
Right on.
levels of, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and I hope I've been clear. That I've never said this is easy. I've never said that. All right, and if somebody told you I did, they're not telling you the truth. It's just not easy, right? And because why? Well, I tried to talk about it a bit in this vision of the robot, right, versus the being, and look, for some of us, it's harder than others, especially early childhood trauma can make it really hard to feel a feeling. I was terrified of my feelings, absolutely terrified of my feelings, which is kind of ironic because being terrified is a feeling, but it was the one that stopped me from being able to go anyplace else. And so, I can tell you, as a hospitalism survivor myself, it's doable. It is doable. And yeah, it's true. For some of us, it's harder than others, no doubt. But no matter who we are, it works. That I've figured out. So thanks for sharing that. Okay, we're gonna leave it at Zena. And now we're going to jump into the exercise as best we can.
Thank you for taking my question, but I noticed that during this year, I am developing empathy, and it is extended to nature and to animal. But in our society full of conflict and war, people almost striving to survive, it seems like I'm crazy or weak, or if I show empathy a lot or empathy to an animal, it seems like I'm crazy or I'm losing my mind or something like this. Would you please say something encouraging?
Sure.
Thank you.
You are losing your mind, okay? Which is really good news because your mind doesn't always help you, right? And so I'm not saying you're losing your whole mind, right? But we're losing part of our mind. We're losing the part of us that judges us, that stops us from being able to be empathic to an animal. And for other people who think I'm crazy, I have empathy for them, because they don't get to go through what I get to go through. And so I don't, right? We can't blame them. I mean, we could, but what good is that going to do us? And so there's two parts to this. Empathy for myself, right? Empathy for yourself, because it's like, ouch, ouch. I wish this wasn't here. I wish that we all had a shared understanding. And I'm going to mourn that, and I'm going to feel that pain. But what is it that I want? Well, I want shared understanding. And I even understand why you don't want to have shared understanding. And that's the thing about us, we can take 100% of the responsibility for our empathy and for giving others empathy too. And so as long as we realize that we have ourselves and hopefully a support system out there, that helps us get through those moments where people think we're crazy. Or people just don't agree with what we're doing, or they may judge us, right? Because they don't like what we're doing, and that's the only way they know how to address it. Does that make sense? All right, cool. All right, so I want to move into this exercise, which is what I love about this exercise. It's the empathy, non-empathy exercise. I think it's published already, right? It was published last Wednesday. And so this is just a way to really get clear. And it's funny, I don't usually like to define things by saying what they're not, but we do have, somehow this really helps because, well, first of all, it's very clear that there are empathic responses and then there are non-empathic responses. Now, I really want to be clear. That doesn't mean you should do one and you shouldn't do the other. And in fact, empathy is never a should in my mind. It's just an option. It's something we can aspire to experience, but it's not necessarily a should. And so I want to be clear that this exercise we're going to do is to help us recognize all the different responses that we tend to use habitually. And I just want to say, look, I'm not saying they're wrong. Sometimes I want advice. Sometimes I want somebody to do some data gathering. It helps me. Sometimes I want sympathy. It doesn't mean that these things are bad and that we shouldn't do these things and we should do empathy. It's not that. The reason we're doing this is so that we have choice, right? To do empathy, just to help define and distinguish empathy as a specific experience that's different from non-empathy. Now, the reason we do non-empathy often enough is we genuinely care about that other person and we want to do something to help them. And what we're good at is using our brains and doing most of the non-empathic things. And what we're not as practiced at is the empathic view and the empathic perception, right? And so I want to know the difference so that we can choose this thing that is unusual, which is the empathic perspective. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. Antonio, you want to pick it up from here?
So, this exercise, I think, again, is just going to differentiate the differences. We're going to bring up, I'm going to share a screen with you all. This is going to be a handout that we're going to use for the exercise. So for now, we're going to actually demo the exercise here in the large group before we do breakouts. When we do breakouts, we'll explain what we're doing and how long we're doing and what the instructions are. But we're going to first do the exercise here together. So I'm going to make a statement, and then from each one of you, I'm going to invite a non-empathic response first. So, and we'll try a variety of them. All right. So I'm going to first pull up the example. We're going to actually put this also into the chat in case you want to print this out. This is all, this was in the course, of course. So you can also grab it from the course itself. But we're going to be using this as a way to just, I'll put this into the chat, and there it is. And I'll open up the chat.
And I just love to add here, this can be actually really fun. When we do these in our in-person workshops, I can always tell when we're doing the empathy, non-empathy game, because there's a lot of laughter in the room. And why is there laughter in the room? Well, we're kind of laughing at our habitual minds and going, oh yeah, I know that one. I know that one. I know that one. But we're not being significant. You know what I mean? We're not going like, oh my God, I did that. That's not it. We just want to look at our brains. Really, that's what we're doing, right? We're going to just take a peek at what our brain wants to do, and thereby creating a little more awareness, right? And a little more choice. And that's why we're doing this.
So maybe for this exercise, what we're going to do is, there are some examples here already, of course, of what comparing looks like, of what educating looks like, giving people advice looks like, right? Discounting, what that looks like. So we have examples here. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to, for now, just for ease and just being able to just move along, efficiency, I'm going to say this statement, and I'm going to ask you to first start off by giving me some comparing and maybe some one-upping. And we can use the chat for this. So, are we good? Or does that make sense? Let's try it. So, I'm coming onto this call because I just want to tell you all that I really just hate my job sometimes because my boss just is such a control freak. All right. What are some examples of some comparing? Well, how could you compare? We'll use the chat. You think your boss is hard? Or you think your boss is bad? There's one.
All right.
Yeah.
So I love this, right? So there's comparing, and then there's comparing on steroids, is how I like to say it, right? It's like, yeah, mine too. But then there's the one-upping. It's like, that's nothing, right?
I have it worse than you.
Yeah, way worse, right? So I'm one-upping you.
And I see those here, right? You should meet my boss.
There you go. No, I've got the worst boss. No, I got the worst boss, right?
So this is awesome. Yeah. If you want, look at the chat. There's some great examples of it here.
Yeah.
We get very creative with non-empathy.
I just want to say, though, right now, that it's very easy for us to judge ourselves for these things. And why are we doing this? Why are we comparing and one-upping? Well, we want them to know that we know what they're going through, right? That's why we would compare. It does serve that function to some degree, but it is not completely connecting in that you're changing the subject a little bit. So each one of these has some genuine purpose in life, but it's just not empathy. And empathy has its own very specific purpose in life, or a number of them, right?
So these are all great examples here. So let's try another one. I'm going to give you the statement again. Sometimes I'm telling you all, my boss just makes going to work a living hell because they're just such a control freak. I don't know what to do. So let's try. Can you give me some educating? Can you give me some advice? How would you educate me? How would you give me some advice? You should discuss it with him. Maybe you should look for a new job.
Come on, when's somebody going to say talk to HR? There it is. Okay.
There it is. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you should learn some NVC. It'd be great. You need
Just
to read this book.
Hey, wait a minute. How do you know it's he?
Have you tried setting better boundaries? Try taking this thing called the compassion course. Try some meditation. Learn some inner calm. Maybe just tolerate it. If I were you, I would. So it's really interesting because I think, just like Tom was saying, we're trying to help sometimes. We're trying to help. So let's not take away the fact that sometimes people are trying to help us. Even other people who have not taken this course, they might be giving us non-empathy because they're trying to help. And it's just what they have in that moment, by the way. That's how we don't make these things, quote, wrong. All right. Let's try a few more here. You know, I've been telling you all about the situation that I have, and it's just driving me crazy because my boss is such a control freak. It makes going to work a living hell. I don't know what to do. I really don't know what to do. So why don't we roll down a little bit to, let's try some sympathy. Can you give me some sympathy? What would that sound like? Poor thing. Poor man. I feel so bad for you.
Wow, you guys are nailing this.
Ah, your boss sounds like a nightmare. That was a little bit more empathy.
Right, that's the thing. Right, there's a fine line that would, and again, you know, some people like, and sometimes I would like some sympathy. I don't need the whole thing. I just want you to know I'm hurting, and when you say this, it helps me realize that you know.
Should I
So,
talk
again,
to your boss for you?
for
There's
a
another
purpose.
one.
Okay.
Yeah. Or it could even be like, I'm so angry when you get angry. Gosh, I hate that boss of yours. Maybe even more than you hate that boss.
Right. So one of the ways we could describe sympathy is a shared, imagined shared experience versus empathy, where we're really focused on what's alive from a feelings and needs perspective and theoretically in the other person. And of course, for ourselves later.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think sympathy meets needs. It's just not empathy. And it's something that's very, again, we're trying to just distinguish things here, right? So that we can just get an understanding. And I think sometimes when you go to the dictionary, there's a little bit of a confusion there between empathy and sympathy. And so, and empathy, just to be clear, it's not co-experiencing. I'm not feeling the other person's feelings. That's some things
You're
I even
connecting
had.
to.
Yeah. I mean, I got caught up on that at the beginning. It's not feeling the other person's feelings. It's being able to understand, have some presence, have some witnessing of what's going on for the other person, right? We're being almost like a sounding board, a reflection, a reflecting mirror for the other person, but we're not being their feelings. Might I have my own sadness when I'm hearing of what's going on for this person? Possibly, but that's my experience. It's not my experience because it's this person's experience. It's my experience because my needs. That's the difference. Okay. So I'm going to give you the statement and let's see what empathy might sound like, what it might look like. Oh, I've been telling you all about this situation with my job. It's a living hell because my boss is just such a control freak. Give me some empathy. What would empathy sound like? What would it look like? Are you frustrated? Needing some space? That's a perfect example for me. Are you feeling discouraged because you need support? You're feeling discouraged because you need consideration. Are you concerned? These are all perfect examples. Now, one thing that I want to really highlight, see what's happening here? We're asking. And let's keep that frame of mind when we go out there to give empathy. Empathy is like when I'm giving an empathy guess, all I'm asking is, are you feeling? And I'm going to pick out a feeling word. And I'm going to ask, because you're needing, and pick out a need word. This is our empathy guess. This is what I've been saying for 10 years when I've been doing empathy calls. Right? This is like, if you want, take a screenshot of this. If you want to print it out, if you want to put it on a refrigerator, if you want to carry like a, business card in your pocket, like, right? Like, get a tattoo. This is what empathy guesses sound like when we're practicing empathy, specifically here in our community. When we're doing empathy calls, like, I'm going to make your job really easy. These words are all you need to say. They are not easy to remember. Our brain wants to do other things. And so we're going to be in that constant checking in with our awareness, seeing where we're putting our focus and our attention. So this is really hard, and it's really strange, and it's something that's not common. So remember all that stuff, because it's going to be hard to make an empathy guess when we're doing a lot of other things with our brain. And when our brain's been trained to do other things.
This is not the only way to give empathy. It is the best way I know of to learn empathy.
Yeah.
Although, imagine if you went to your in-laws and said, are you feeling anxious because you need support? They might look at you like, what are you talking about? In other words, somebody who doesn't understand feelings and needs. So we will be working on this in the future, by the way. And that is, we can give empathy without using feelings and needs words. However, it only works when we actually know what those feelings and needs words are before we say the next set of words. So I might say something like, instead of saying, are you feeling exhausted because you need rest? I might say, wow, sounds like you just got the wind knocked out of your sails. Right? So we will move there, but let's start, please, by really doing, are you feeling because you're needing? And if it feels weird, it may be because we're not really connected to what we're saying yet. And so that's why we have exercises, and we continually go back to this practice of embodiment, right? Yeah. Of looking, really connecting in a deep way to these words that in the beginning we may not be so connected to, right? And so instead of saying, oh, I'm not going to use these words because it feels weird, I'm going to ask you to stay with it until, like I say, you can say those words and you mean it.
Cool. So we can review, how did that go? What happened out there? Any feedback, please?
Ranjit.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful practice. I didn't thought about earlier about picking my needs list because I struggle with connecting with the words because it's a fast-paced kind of time-based practice, and but my friends helped me a bit with correcting, I would say, or getting across that hump, and I really enjoyed the practice. Thank you.
Cool, thanks. Okay, Rosalind.
Wow, that was a really, really great experience. Quite awkward. And but it's so neat how when we would ask an empathy guess, and the person would say, no, not quite, try again. And then usually the second time we all nailed it. And it's very interesting. My question is about this, like, what do we say after that person agrees with us, like to not have that like awkward silence that happens?
We want that silence.
Okay.
Because when they said yes, that meant that they were walking their path to self-connection, right? And so where does that happen? That happens in space. And I know exactly what you're talking about, because you're being like, they said yes. Oh man, I'm on a roll. Quick, let me think of something else to say. And you know, but that's not, it's weird, right? What actually helps is to leave that space. And soon what happens is awkward spaces turn into creative spaces. Okay, Terry.
Yeah, it really met my need for shared reality, because we all knew what the disconnecting things were and we were saying them anyway. And but we knew we were going to get the empathy guess at the end. So it was kind of like, yeah, it was fun. Thanks.
Yeah, again, just we want to distinguish, right? It's all about distinguishing. So cool. Karen. You have to unmute. There you
Thanks. It was a great exercise. I agree. Met my need for feeling supported, because I brought up something that happened this weekend and I was embarrassed to say it, but I just thought I'd experiment. So I shared it, and I got a lot of compassion and support. So, but one takeaway is that a question that arose out of it by one of the people who were giving me the correct response about a suggestion for feelings and needs was that in her own experience, she could relate exactly, everyone related to my situation, which surprised me, because I thought this is something I always stuff by not expressing myself because I don't want to upset the group or something. Anyway, her input was that she finds sometimes that when she tries to do NVC work with her friends, because they don't have the perspective in this background, that she actually feels she's losing friends. And I had to agree that if I said, are you feeling this because you need that? That just feels very stilted and unrealistic. And in a typical prattling conversation where people are mindlessly jabbering, which is my point, it's just, and then you suddenly pipe up with something that's truly coming from a completely different compass point. It can kind of bring about silence in that weird look.
Totally. And it could be alienating, right? I mean, here's the thing. Like, we're not, if we expect everybody to just come to us, right? Come to our consciousness, I think we're making a mistake, because we're working at it, and it's right. And it's a challenge for us. So to expect that somebody else would be able to make sense of this just doesn't, it just doesn't work. So I guess my advice is read the room, like figure out who you're with and what makes sense to them. And again, we'll get into this later. It doesn't mean you could never give empathy to somebody who doesn't know how to say, are you feeling, because you're needing. However, there's the reason we're doing it this way is we're really running through tires, so to speak, right? We're like practicing a skill that we're going to use inside of a bigger game. And so that's why we're saying, are you feeling, because you're needing? But later on, I might say something like, yikes. And it's empathic. In fact, later on, I might say nothing. I may just wonder in the presence of that person. And so this is just the beginning. This is us, like football players, running through tires, getting our skill set together for later on when we're in the Super Bowl. So let's not make them come to us. Let's go to them. All right. Clifford.
First time I've ever done this type of exercise. It was amazing. I felt an angsty desire to connect with the non-empathic responses. But as soon as I got the empathic responses, wow, my body I felt more relaxed. That became a point of empathic responses. And I even had in the back of my brain an insight into a crucial relationship with my mother in my childhood, like a massive thing around empathy and getting these responses and seeing and experiencing what it felt like to be connected to, which was another need that became clear in the exercise, was my need to just connect and feel safe connecting with others. So those are some comments about our group.
Thanks. See what's happening though, Clifford, is like you're starting to see a map, if you will, right, of all the different things. And then we connect to some and not to others. And suddenly we get to know ourselves that much better. And it's an ongoing process, which is pretty cool. It's never over. There's always more layers here for us. And we'll talk about that later on in the course as well. Fontaine.
Oh, hey, thanks. Yeah, because of the structure of the exercise, it really created safety, I felt, and a sense of playfulness, which always gets more out of my brain than if I'm like, you must do this thing.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Because there was less pressure to get it right, you know.
Yeah.
So that even when I made an empathy guess that wasn't right on, it still felt okay. Instead of, I felt a little bit ashamed, but it was less so than I would ordinarily. So thank you.
Thanks for mentioning that, right? Because we grew up being graded on everything we've ever done practically, right? It's like, did you get an A, a B, a C? Did you get that right? Did you get it wrong? Blah, blah, blah. And here's the wonderful thing about empathy guesses. There's no such thing as a wrong empathy guess. In a way, if you're guessing, if you're curious, it doesn't matter what you say. It's your curiosity that actually imbues the empathy, right? It's your curiosity and the ability to, to be curious, and then somebody will go, they'll get curious with you, right, about themselves, and they'll go, no, it's this other thing. And so again, we play a game called Wacky Empathy, where we actually make the exact wrong guess, like the opposite of what you think it might be. And then you go, well, no, it's not that. It's this other thing. And it's just really fun to notice that this works regardless of the quote accuracy of the guess. And it's not to say it's not really fun to make an accurate guess. Why? Because we get the connection, right? Yet it's not a requirement. Let's not, if we had to do that, it's just too nerve-wracking, right? It's like, I don't believe in white knuckle training. I just don't. It's everything should be, step by step. And that's why the course, goes for a year, right? It's bit by bit by bit. And so, yeah, so thanks for sharing that. I'll tell you. Asmita.
Yes, so it was a very joyful, playful exercise. One question that came up was, can you provide empathy by just being silent? Through a hug, through a gesture, through touching? Would that qualify as empathy? Because sometimes when someone's grieving or mourning, just without words, can you convey that empathy?
Absolutely. We're definitely, we have mirror cells. We're all hooked up, words or not, provided those mirror cells have the right information, right? And so it's different. Silent empathy is different than silence, in that we're acknowledging, even in here, right? Just what's alive in them. And then that will energetically influence your relationship in that moment. So kind of like that. So absolutely silent empathy. Now, when it comes to touching and things like that, I would like to be very careful about that, because a lot of times, what is that? That might be non-empathy. It might be, it could be perceived as, oh, don't worry, or let me help, let me fix this, right? And often it's helpful to let somebody continue on their journey instead of trying to slow them down. So that's about the touching thing, right?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Pam.
Hi. So we all playfully did the exercise, and then there were a few minutes at the end where, the tires hit the road and somebody had a real need for empathy, and the time was running out, and I just wanted to share something from Marshall Rosenberg. And so that's my question.
He's got a good reputation around here, so go ahead.
So that's kind of my question, it's like when we're working with our empathy buddy or in these settings with these groups, is it okay to provide a reference or educate something that I know or have familiarity with Marshall Rosenberg or a page in the book or whatever?
Well, let's talk about that. Speaking of Marshall Rosenberg, empathy before education, one of my favorite quotes from him. And so my habitual mind may want to educate, but I want to be clear that I've given like pure empathy, like open to my present mind as much as humanly possible. And I said earlier, yeah, of course, life is a series of strategies. And the only way they're going to be born of an awareness of feelings and needs is empathy first. So there's a place in the world for education. Of course, there's a place in the world for all the quote non-empathic responses, but they're not empathy. And so we just want to be clear on why do I want to give them this information? Is it because I'm giving them empathy, or is it because I want to stop this right now and help them fix this? So, and there's no way, right? I don't know what your answer is, and it almost doesn't matter. It's something that we all want to ask ourselves as we're in the process. So kind of like that. So yes and no is the answer. Okay. Thanks, Pam. So that is a wrap. Thanks for coming. Thanks for playing. Wow. Okay, just wow. Really appreciate your presence, your participation, your interest, your partnership in trying to make this place we're living slightly more compassionate in our lifetime. So thank you for that.